Thank you, everybody, for coming on a very sultry, sticky day. I'm going to do a short 2 to 3 hour spiel right out here. So let's move out there where I can talk about what is a shade tree. Okay, as I am wont to do, I was trying to find a good definition of what a shade tree is. And of course, there's lots of different ones floating out there in the internet sphere. So I've kind of pulled together a combination of those and ones that I've picked up all through my illustrious career of wrangling and managing trees and recommending trees. So kind of in a nutshell, and with that in mind, a shade tree is a tree that typically has a very large canopy, and it's often broad and wide spreading, with lots of branches and a good sized crown to shield and shade from the sun. It also provides cool shelter for homes and commercial structures and room for wildlife and all of those things. The benefits of shade trees are pretty easy to understand. They provide lots of cooling. You can exhibit that on a super hot day and walk up here in the sun and dip into where these live oaks are, and you can physically feel the temperature literally drop when you go into those spaces. So cooling is very, very important as a category of a shade tree. They provide energy savings. If you think of having a good shade tree over your house, your air conditioning isn't going to have to crank on all the time, particularly if they're south or west facing to kind of block the sun a little bit. They're typically large. Most of the definitions I found said shade trees are 30 to 80 feet tall. Who here has that much space in their yard? Well, I know you do, and you have some that big in your garden, but not everybody does. And our landscapes and home sizes and yards are shrinking all the time. So my spin on that is I want to stay away from kind of the usual suspects that you'll see all through the city, and we're lucky to live somewhere where there's a lot of attention paid to shade trees, street trees, and that urban landscape. I'm going to stay away from those because those people are doing it well, and I want to show you the J.C. Raulston, Greg Paige spin on that, and try to pick trees that are a little bit more in scope with most of the landscapes that we have. So with that in mind, with that definition, the tree behind me, this Japanese maple, which is kind of a signature tree, that's not providing a lot of shade. That's a nice ornamental tree. The slender silhouette, sweet gum back there, nice and tall, not providing a lot of shade. That's a fastigiate tree. I've done that tour before. Both really good urban trees, but not providing a lot of shade. The peeve minaret taxodium over here, again, that's a dwarf tree. In the scope of bald cypresses, which get to be 100 feet tall, that's pretty dwarf in comparison. Nice tree, great urban tree, not providing a lot of shade. So that kind of sets the stage for what I'm talking about. Everybody cool with that? Understand? All right, let's go look at our first tree right down the hill here. So the first tree that I wanted to show y'all is this maple behind me. This is Acer caudata-folium. This is a Kwakami maple. It's a maple from Japan. Again, these are my flavors of trees. These are things that I think are kind of unique and garner more attention. This isn't something that you're going to go out and find tomorrow. It's something that we kind of, in that realm of preaching for good urban trees, this has always been on one of my lists for that. It's multi-stemmed, but it's got a nice broad crown. It's filling in a very nice shady spot down here. It's got nice fall color. You can see it has lots of samaras, the seed pods on it, which I think give it lots of interest. I'm going to go ahead and apologize right off the bat. I like things that look good winter, spring, summer, fall. I talk about it ad nauseum all the time, and most of the things I'm going to show you today scratch that itch for me. So Acer caudata-folium, the Kwakami maple, a really good tree for most of our landscapes. Very, very drought and tolerant of urban conditions, which is also kind of a plus in that regard. Any questions before we move to the next one? Yes? What kind of fall color? Yellows and oranges in a good year. There's a lot of debate already brewing about what our fall color is going to look like this fall because of the drought that we've gone through. And drought tends to stress plants out. Plants under stress usually have good fall color. So that means we're not going to have any fall color this year. It's going to go from this to nothing. I say that facetiously, but I hope we have a good fall color this year. But this tree usually never disappoints. Lots of yellow. Anybody else? The next one is right over here. So I would be remiss and subject to probably thrashing and other disciplinary actions if I didn't mention a redbud on this tour. So this is Cercis canadensis silver cloud. Again, winter, spring, summer, fall interest. As redbuds get big and mature, they get really nice bark, I think. This one has a nice white variegation, splottiness in the leaves. I've got a bazillion pictures of this that I took 15 years ago that I use in talks and stuff. It had a nice neighbor across here that was Silver Splash or somebody that disappeared. But I really, really like this redbud. And as it's grown over time, it's developed this nice kind of wide crown. We've got a nice bench here that is protected from the sun by this tree. And it really, really provides a lot of good shade in a small, tight spot. So that's where I really argue that a shade tree needs to be 30, 40, 50 feet tall. If it's providing shade in a small area like this, that's a good tree to plug into a lot of different types of landscapes. It's native. Fall color is kind of yellow. It has the added benefit of really nice kind of fuchsia, purplish flowers in the spring. So lots of boxes checked for me in that multiple season of interest, and a really, really good redbud for urban landscapes. Yes? How old is this tree? I'm not sure. It's been here for at least 20 years. The question was, does it grow quickly? Redbuds are pretty easy to establish. The city of Raleigh has really plugged redbuds into their urban treescape, which is good because they don't get super big. There's lots of different cultivars. They can stay kind of low. They work well under power lines because they're not going to go up into that strata. It's native, it has great flowers, and they're pretty forgiving in urban situations. And there's a flavor for any landscape situation. Lots of different sizes, shapes, leaf color. NC State has kind of led the charge in growing and developing and trialing them. I don't think this is one of NC State, but there are a lot of them out there. Former director Denny Werner had his hands in that, and we've got a ton of them planted all throughout the garden. It's one of my favorite trees. The question was, is this the purple flowers you see on the edge of the woods? Yes, if you drive down 40 in the springtime, they're everywhere blooming along the side of the road. If you go to the mountains, same thing. It's a beautiful tree, really, really good. If it can grow in those kinds of situations, it's going to do well in urban situations. The only Achilles heel of redbuds is, and I think this is more a nursery thing than the tree's fault, is they look better with more stems, and they can be kind of structural nightmares and just kind of fall and split apart. We've had that happen to more of them than I can care to remember. We had a flamethrower up in the garden that's what happened to it. It split apart. We pulled that tree out over 2 years ago, and I still get emails asking where that tree is. But that's the only Achilles heel of them. Any other questions before we move on? Are the seed pods edible? I don't know. I am somebody that steers away from eating things in the garden. I'm not Tim or Mark, who at any opportunity will, for effect, I think mostly throw something in their head and chew it up. I don't think they would be very tasty. Some people don't like the seed pods. A lot of the newer ones don't produce as many, but some of the ones that are closer to straight species produce tons of them. I think it's an added interest, especially in the wintertime. Yes, the question was, will they produce other redbuds? I think they're pretty prolific seeders. You can walk through the garden, and there's a couple over here that are coming up. You know, I don't have the patience for that. I want a tree in a bag from Food Lion. I want a tree that's going to grow and get big. I don't have the patience to wait for seedlings, but they're pretty easy to grow from seeds. Anybody else? All right, let's go to the next one. All right, the next one on my list is one that's near and dear to my heart. This is a Tilia linden. or as our friends across the seas call them, limes. This is Tilia henryani, Henry's lime. This is one of my favorite trees because I love the texture of the leaf. It's got a nice serrated edge. The other thing that's great about it is it produces a ton of flowers. So when it's flowering, it absolutely quivers and vibrates and shakes with all kinds of bees and pollinators, just completely all over it. It's got a pretty nice kind of sweet smell that wafts through the garden, especially when it's warm. This one, you notice a great big gap here. We took out a neighbor tree that decided to give up the ghost. We had an ash planted back here that I'm pretty sure had emerald ash borer. So we've lost a couple limbs because that tree was kind of protecting this linden from the wind. So usually it has a nice broad shape, which is perfect for it being called a shade tree. All lindens in general, aside from some of the small ones, which I've talked about in other tours, are really, really good urban trees used for street trees, for shade trees. They're relatively tough. I've seen these all the way down in Atlanta, and they do very, very well. This one's a little more unusual. It's one that we're trying to propagate so that we can share it with lots of other folks. I think this one is grafted. We usually leave the suckers at the base because that's really good propagation material. I've not noticed those little wings that this one has on the edges on the ones that are coming up. So I don't think it's, we've taken cuttings to see if it eventually goes back to that, but I'm guessing this might be grafted. But I love lindens, love the flowers, love the attractiveness to pollinators. Fall color is kind of an inconsistent yellow in good years. Most years they get kind of dunny brown and just fall off. The bark is kind of nice and smooth. They have a nice texture in the wintertime. One of my favorite trees to recommend for urban trees and shade trees. Any questions about lindens? British call lindens limes. Limes, like the fruit. I think it might be something to do with the fruit that's on them. Other than that, I'm not sure. I'm not going to argue with such a great name like that. I'm sure there's a story in there somewhere. I just never have taken the time to kind of suss that out. But if you ever hear somebody talking about limes, they're probably talking about these guys. Any other questions? All right, let's keep on trucking. So I said that I would stay away from kind of the usual suspects. I may have lied just a teeny bit, but there's not a better example in the Arboretum than these two Quercus fellows, willow oaks. That's a tree that might be overused from an urban tree landscape standpoint. If you ever drive through Charlotte, it's planted everywhere. And the reason it's planted everywhere, it's a really tough urban tree, and for an oak, it grows pretty quickly and provides immense amounts of shade and all those things that I talked about earlier with cooling and habitat for wildlife, birds and insects and other critters. It's a pretty decent, hard-working tree. I don't like to not recommend it. Just mix some other diversity in there with it. Don't just let that be your only thing. If you inherit one, that's not a bad thing. They're really, really beautiful, very, very classic. Big, 40, 50, 60 feet tall, nice broad crown, covering a lot of area, helping filter the air, helping protect the soil, all those things that shade trees and urban trees do. It's a perfect example of what a classic shade tree kind of looks like. You may not have room for it, but there's a lot of them throughout Raleigh and surrounding area. It's a really good, hardworking tree. Any questions about that before we move on? Yes. Is there any way to identify that from afar? Willow oaks get that name from that thin lanceolate leaf, and that texture to me kind of stands out. Chances are if you're in an urban landscape in North Carolina, there's going to be 1 or 2 or 10 of these around. So that's a pretty good way. But it's that foliage that kind of gives it away. What's their lifespan? I'm going to give you the classic horticultural answer. It depends. It depends on the amount of urban stress. It depends on how that tree's kind of been treated, structural pruning, the root system, all that kind of stuff. And that's the big misconception about willow oaks. I was talking to a friend of mine in Charlotte years ago, and he was going on and on about how crappy the willow oak was. And it's not crappy, but if you plant it in a little parking strip where it doesn't have room for the roots to grow, it's going to struggle and fall apart like anything will. If you have a great big one in a landscape, and then all of a sudden you put driveways around it and houses and roads, and it starts to fall apart on houses and cars, it's not the tree's fault, it's the urban situation that it's in. So in a perfect growing environment, they can live to be 100 years old or more. If somebody would look at that tree and say that tree is 100, 200 years old, it's not that old. It's probably 80 at the most. They're fast growing. We have a long growing season here. I've had more arguments with people that have moved here from other parts of the country where the growing season is slower, and something like that someplace else might be 100 years old, but that tree is probably 80 at the most. The comment was one of the nice things about it compared to other oaks is that thin lanceolate leaf kind of disappears in the landscape when it falls off. And that is a plus for this tree. The other plus, which I may talk about later on, but I'm probably going to forget, there's two groups of oaks that are used in landscapes. There's the red oak family and the white oak family. This guy's in the white oak family. Oaks in the white oak family tend to be much better urban trees. They don't succumb to a lot of the foliar diseases that oaks get. Oaks are notorious for getting bacterial leaf scorch, lots of other foliar issues and root issues. The red oak family is really, really bad in that regard. Most of the trees in the white oak family, willow oak, sawtooth oaks, Quercus bicolor, swamp whites, Quercus michoii, basket oak, those are much, much better urban oaks for the landscape. I've got one at the end, which is in the red oak family, that is probably one of the better, one of the few red oaks that doesn't have all those issues with it. Any other questions before we move on? We're not going to go far. The next one's right behind us. So again, our spin on urban trees, Liriodendron tulipifera, the tulip poplar is a pretty good tree. They get super, super big. They provide a lot of shade. This is Liriodendron chinensis, and this is one that JC selected. It's Liriodendron chinensis JC Raulston. It has a bigger, wider leaf than our native. It still produces the flowers. You can see some late ones coming on. There's one or two right above my head here, and it gets that common name tulip tree from that flower. It's in the same family as magnolias, so you look at that flower and you can definitely see that. But what I like about this tree, it's got a nice broad canopy, so it provides a lot of shade. Also, that great big leaf is going to block a lot of sunlight and provide the shade that I've been talking about. Good yellow fall color. Pretty decent urban adaptability. This one needs a little more room than some of the smaller things that I've talked about, but I like this tree because of that broad leaf and that nice wide shape that it has. Just like our native tulip tree, there's a lot of variation in tulip Liriodendron chinensis. There's one on the main lawn that's nice and straight and has had a hard time this drought. This one has been much less problematic in the heat that we had. You'll see a little bit of leaf drop, which is kind of normal for this time of the year, but considering how dry we've been, this tree has kind of come through much, much better. And I'll point out the other one as we walk up that way, just so you can kind of see the differences. Yes? The question was, is the wood brittle in storms like the native one is? Tulip popular trees can be kind of brittle. In really bad weather, they can fall apart. They don't like ice and snow load, and they'll kind of fall apart with that. For whatever reason, I think there's a lot of moisture in it. They are also commonly struck by lightning, which is not if I were a tulip tree, I'd be very scared of that issue. But some of that is urban stresses and tolerances that cause those things. If they don't have good growth habits, if you've got one and you remove all the stuff away from it, it's going to fall apart because it's been protected over time. They succumb to that much more than a lot of other trees do. Any other questions? All right, let's head to the next one. Next one behind me, this is becoming a maple fest unintentionally, but maples are really good trees, and there's a lot of focus on them here at the JC Raulston. This is Acer truncatum golden dragon, the golden dragon shantung maple. This has been on my most recommended really good urban tree list for as long as I've been in horticulture. It's such an underutilized tree, and it's absolutely bomb-proof in urban environments. Very, very tough, very adaptable to heavy clay soils, urban soils. Typically has really good fall color. This one's yellows, reds, and oranges, sometimes all at the same time, sometimes just yellow. This one has kind of a yellowish color earlier in the growing season. And as the heat of the summer and the stresses therein kick in, it kind of reverts back to this green. But if you feel the leaf, it's very glossy, very thick, which I think lends itself to being good in urban situations. This particular one has kind of a nice wide crown, and for a small spot, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to provide a lot of shade in a very small kind of compact area. Because of that dense leaf, because of that thick leaf, it's going to block a lot of the sun and provide all those benefits of a shade tree. Again, winter, spring, summer, fall interest. Once this drops its leaves in the fall, I really like the bark on this. It's got kind of a really nice texture to it and adds a lot of interest in the wintertime. Nice, sharp, pointy buds on it, kind of reminiscent of a sugar maple. So this tree is high on my list of favorite trees and things that I recommend. Unfortunately, nursery folk haven't bought into that yet, but hopefully eventually they will. But part of the mission here at the JC is to recommend trial and look at these sorts of things. And this is a great, great maple for smaller places in the landscape. Any questions about this one? Alrighty, we're gonna head down the path next. So we were just discussing, this is a big one, and I had to put some big ones on here because just the way that the shapes kind of represent what most people think of as a shade tree, and things that are good ones to sub into kind of the usual suspects of the red maples and the oaks of the world. This is Zelkova serrata goshiki. This is a variegated Japanese Zelkova, and I'm not sure if JC had a hand in introducing these or not, but the first time I ever saw one of these was here many, many years ago. So this tree's been here probably 30, 40 years, I would say. Zelkovas are really good urban trees, classic vase shape, very dense branches, very dense foliage. This one has a little bit of a variegated fringe on it, which is much more noticeable early in the spring. It's very golden and very, very bright and fades as we get through the summer. Fall color is kind of an inconsistent yellow. Usually it just kind of yellows, browns, and then all drops at the same time. But a really, really good urban tree. As the bark on some of these develops, it gets a little bit of exfoliation. This one has a little bit of that effect, not a ton of it. But again, winter, spring, summer, fall, this is a tree that scratches that itch for me. That texture really comes out in the wintertime, that nice vase shape, but a really good tree if you've got the room for that, that shade and that coverage and that really pretty, unique, unusual golden color in the spring. That's what this thing's claim to fame is. But it really fits in nicely here. And I don't know if it was intentional when they designed the landscape, but it fits in with the variegated plants perfectly right here. I'm going to give thumbs up and credit to Doug for that when it happened, but fits in well with this part of the border. Any questions before we move on? All right, we're not going far, right down here to this oak. So again, another big one, but this is one that I think needs to be used more as an urban tree. And luckily there's quite a few of these in the downtown and edge of downtown area. This is Quercus marnicifolia, the Chinese bamboo leaf oak. It gets that name because the foliage looks a little bit like bamboo. One of the benefits of this guy is it's evergreen, so it's gonna provide this shade all year long. No fall color to speak of because of that, but I like the multi-trunks and I like that spread that they get. This is a pretty typical look. We've got a nice stout trunk and bigger trunks that kind of peel off. So that's going to provide a lot of shade as it photosynthesizes and does the thing that trees do. It's going to help filter out the air and all that kind of stuff. Pretty much all season long when the temperatures are right. But I really, really like this tree because of that evergreen look. Needs space and room for that, obviously, but worth mentioning in the realm of oaks. I don't think evergreen oaks are used quite enough, and they're starting to creep in to zones as climate change kind of shifts those things around. Any questions about this one? All right, we're going that way next. Okay. Another one kind of in that bigger medium range, and another one with a little bit more season of interest to me. This is Prunus tecasumensis, the oolong cherry. This is native to China, I believe. And for a cherry to have this much foliage on it in August, most of the cherries that are used in the landscape have really started to show the stresses of urban changes in temperature and disease pressure. Usually by August, a lot of the urban trees have already shut down and dropped all their leaves, which is a shame because cherries usually have really nice fall color. This thing doesn't have a leaf spot on it anywhere. The leaf is very thick and glossy, which I think helps with some of those disease pressures and urban tolerances. This is one that's high on my list to propagate and share with people and get more out there. Covered with really pretty white flowers that the pollinators like in the spring, really beautiful classic cherry bark on it. And because of that broad, very typical cherry-shaped leaf, it provides a lot of shade throughout the summer when you need it the most. This is on our path coming into the garden for when we do moonlight and the food trucks. And this thing is happy, and I always have to end up lifting some of the limbs off of it. And you can't even tell that I've done that at this point. So very, very tolerant, very forgiving. I don't think we watered this corner of the garden at all through this drought. And this thing is happy and has not skipped a beat. So I'm going to keep preaching about this tree until I see it spread far and wide in the nursery industry. I really like cherries, and it's sad to see a lot of them not do so well in our urban situations. So really, really good one. I love those flowers in the early spring. Any questions about that? Yes?
What's the name of the cherry again?
It's Prunus tecasumensis. That's a mouthful, and I know I just butchered that name again. I've said it two different ways. In my brain, I can hear that. Any other questions? Anything else you want me to mispronounce? All right, I think we just have one more, or two more maybe, down here next. I mentioned earlier the two groups of oaks, the white oaks and the red oaks. This is a really good native urban oak. This is Quercus schumardii. Schumard's oak. I think that's named after a prominent plant botanist or amateur botanist in Texas who may have discovered it or something. All the stories start to blur together at a certain time frame and certain point in the week. But this is in the red oak family, and typically red oaks have a lot of issues in urban environments. This is a pretty commonly used street tree, urban tree, shade tree, all throughout the southeast, all the way up into this part of North Carolina. See it a lot in Texas and further west and south of us, but it really, really holds up well in urban situations. One of the complaints about this tree is it produces and drops a lot of acorns. If this is planted near a parking lot, I can see where that will be a problem. I like the acorns. I think they're kind of pretty, especially when they're still on the tree. They provide a lot of food for wildlife, which might be a negative thing because I know deer like to eat them. But if they're eating these, they're not eating your plants. So there might be a bit of a trade-off there. But I really, really like the leaf texture of this. In a good fall color year, it's a really bright to kind of burgundy red, hence the red oak family. But see this used quite a bit in urban landscapes, and it's a good foil to, here's a willow oak right next to it, and the two different textures. Per our last conversation about the leaves disappearing, these leaves aren't going to disappear. You're going to have to chew them up, rake them up, or leave them on the ground, kind of like we do to provide a mulch in this part of the garden. Any questions about this one before we go to our last tree? All right, one more to go. So I would also be remiss and subject to lots of union backlash if I didn't recommend some of the Asian maples that we have here, and in theme with some of the things that JC liked about this place and the theme of our logo, and in keeping with promoting our 50th anniversary. This is Acer pseudosibodianum. This is a Korean maple, and in the realm of those kind of Japanese Acer palmatum looking plants, this one's a little bit different. It's a different species. It's going to get a little bit bigger, and for a small garden, this is a great small to medium-sized shade tree. This is about the max height of this. It can get a little bit bigger in its natural habitat and where it has a little bit more room and isn't underneath the overstory of some bigger trees. But if you think about the competition that this thing is doing with these big oaks and all these big trees here in Plantsman's Woods, this tree is pretty happy and pretty healthy. Lots of dense shade in here, which if you have a situation like this where you have big trees in your landscape and you want that punch of fall color and something to kind of fill in that strata of the landscape, these and a lot of the other Asian maples are good subjects for that. Red to yellow, orangish fall color, good green, consistent, trouble-free foliage throughout most of the year. Nice, smooth bark, incredible architecture in the wintertime. What's not to love about some of these kind of smaller maples? I need to do a head count and see how many maples I had. I completely unintentionally didn't want this to be a maple fest, but it has turned into that, which is not a bad thing. But any questions about this last tree? All right, thanks for coming, y'all.